But anyway, why don't we go to the book of Samuel? And what I would like to do today is actually do two chapters, 21 and 22, because they're really all part of one story. Let's see if we can get that going. So what ended up happening last at the end of chapter 20 is, of course, Jonathan and David's last meeting, and it becomes crystal clear that Saul is actually intent on killing David, and so they separate. And actually, the first verse of 21, I believe, connects more to the previous chapter. David then went his way and Jonathan returned to the town. Okay, so they split. And then the next story really begins with verse 2. And we find here that David is going to Nov, a city or town, Nov. It is in the Benjamin region. And let's read through the whole story, 21 and 22, and then we're going to go back and kind of take it apart. Okay. David went to the priest Achimelech at Nov. Achimelech came out in alarm to meet David, and he said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" David answered the priest Achimelech, "The king has ordered me on a mission, and he said to me, 'No one must know anything about the mission on which I am sending you and for which I have given you orders.' So I've directed my men to such and such a place. Now then, what have you got on hand? Any loaves of bread? Let me have them, or whatever is available." So first of all, just to point out here, we're going to go back to the question of where is Nov and the history of this place. But who is Achimelech? Achimelech is a priest, as we can see, and many believe that he is actually he's the same person that's also referred to as Achiyah. Okay, Achiyah, Achimelech, very similar names. If you think about it, there's some people say, well, Achiyah is just like a shortened version of Achimelech. But Achimelech means brother of the king. Achiyah means brother of God. So it's very, very possible that when you're talking about brother of God, you are talking about brother of the king, not necessarily the king that is King Saul, but the king of God. So in both cases, the name is referred to somebody who is very devoted to God or very close to God. And if you look in chapter 14, just go back a couple chapters. Okay, chapter 14, verse 3. Where am I? Yeah, chapter 14. Okay, chapter 14, verse 3. We meet a priest, okay, whose name is Achiyah. Achiyah, the son of Achitub, brother of Ichabod, son of Phinehas, or Pinchas, the son of Eli, the priest of the Lord at Shiloh. Okay, so those who think it's the same person, and it really does make sense that it's the same person, and we can see that why later. Okay, who is this person? Ichabod is his uncle. Okay, which means he's a descendant of Eli. He's a high priest. He's a descendant of Eli. When we last met Eli some decades earlier, he was the last high priest in the tabernacle at Shiloh before it was destroyed. And we know that he has two sons, Hophni and Pinchas. And here we learn that, Phinehas, okay, was killed. We know that those two sons were killed. And we learned that they're killed, just after they're killed, his wife, his widow, gives birth to a baby whose name is Ichabod. Okay, so it seems there was an older son already whose name is Achituv, and that son's son, okay, is Achiyah. So this is actually a great grandson of Eli. So it's interesting that this is who it is, and we'll talk more about what he was doing there. But he's clearly the high priest, and he's in Nov. If you'll recall, we know that the ark has arrived in Kiryat Yearim. Kiryat Yearim is also a town in Benjamin. Kiryat Yearim is a town west of Jerusalem. Nov is probably north of Jerusalem, and we'll get to that shortly. Okay, so it seems that there's something going on with priests and a high priest in Nov, even though the ark is in Kiryat Yarim. And we can see from the conversation as it goes on that it seems to have some kind of temple or tabernacle located here. So listen to what he says. Okay, he's asked for any loaves of bread. And what does the priest answer? I have no ordinary bread on hand. There's only consecrated bread, provided the young men have kept away from women. What is consecrated bread? Could this possibly be the loaves of bread that are on the table in the tabernacle? In reply, okay, and he's talking about consecrated bread. There is some kind of center here of, is there a tabernacle here? And there is a tradition that says when the Shiloh was destroyed and the tabernacle was destroyed, that the vessels from the tabernacle, we know the ark had been taken into battle, but the vessels from the tabernacle end up going to Nov. So it could be there is some kind of a temple or something here with an altar, etc., that is in Nov. Okay, let's continue. Verse 6. In reply to the priest, David said, I assure you the women have been kept from us as always. Whenever I went on a mission, even if the journey was a common one, the vessels of the young men were consecrated. All the more then may consecrated food be put into their vessels today. So the priest gave him consecrated bread because there was none there except the bread of display. So here we have very, very clearly that the bread of display. Now this is very specifically says it is that bread, the show bread or the bread of display that was in that table in the tabernacle. So this is another indication that there was some sort of tabernacle there in Nov, which had been removed from the presence of the Lord to be replaced by warm bread as soon as it was taken away. Now one of Saul's officials was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief herdsman. Okay, so let me first point out a few things here. David is running away from Saul, but nobody knows that David is an enemy of Saul. Okay, this has not gone out yet. And so when David shows up here, the priest is just surprised that he's not with an entourage, because how do the people know David? He's a general. He is one of the king's men. He's also leads an army. He is the one who will go out in front of an army to do all kinds of missions. And so David shows up by himself. He doesn't even have an aide. He has nobody with him. So that raises a bit of suspicion in the eyes of Achimelech. So he asks him, what are you doing here all by yourself? And so what David answers, of course, is a lie, but he's protecting himself. And he's saying, well, I'm on a secret mission, so I'm just coming here to get some supplies, and my, and it's all very top secret. Nobody really knows where anybody is, and that's just because we're on a very special mission. And therefore he trusts him because David is known at that point as the most trustworthy servant of Saul, and Achimelech has no reason to doubt that that's really what's happening. But meanwhile, we learn that there's this other fellow here, Doeg HaAdomi, and there's two things we know about him. The way this is translated here, it says, detained before the Lord. The word in Hebrew is ne'etzar. It can be detained. It could mean halted. It could mean he's just there for a time. He's kind of delayed, or the idea being this is a fellow who was at the tabernacle spending a longer time than average there before the Lord. Okay, and we're going to go back to that afterwards. What is the significance of that word? The second thing we learn is that he's a chief herdsman. Okay, and is he just a chief herdsman in that is he just in charge of Saul's flocks, or does he himself have a major flock of sheep? And that puts him in financially in a very important place. Okay, put those two things aside. We're going to get to them afterwards. David said to Achimelech, well, haven't you got a spear or sword on hand? I didn't take my sword or any of my weapons with me because the king's mission was urgent. Okay, The priest said, there is the sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom you slew in the valley of Elah. It is over there wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you want to take that one, take it, for there is none here but that one. David replied, there's none like it. Give it to me. Okay. Now, of course, this is all very ironic. He first rose to prominence before Saul because of this Saul of Goliath, and now he's going to be relying on the sword in his fleeing from Saul. So, it's just very interesting. That day, David continued on his flight from Saul, and he came to King Achish of Gath. The courtiers of Achish said to him, why, that's David, king of the land. That's the one of whom they sing as they dance. Saul has slain his thousands. David is tens of thousands, which, of course, we saw this in the past when David first comes to prominence in Saul's court. And we learned this is, of course, what first ticks off Saul when he first starts to get jealous. When David comes out, all the women gather and they sing this. Saul has slain his thousands, David his tens of thousands. And so it seems that his reputation has gone way beyond the women of Israel, but has also reached the Philistines. But what happens? What does this mean? These words worried David, and he became very much afraid of King Achish of Gath. So he concealed his good sense from them, and he feigned madness for their benefit. He scratched marks on the doors of the gate and let his saliva run down his beard. And Achish said to his couriers, you see the man is raving. Why bring him to me? Do I lack madmen that you have brought this fellow to rave for me? Should this fellow enter my house? Now, David is going to end up going back to Achish later on. But at this point, he is desperate. He doesn't know where to go next. He got some supplies from Nov. He goes on to Gath, okay? And then he realizes what's the problem? That the very fact that the men of Achish are saying, here's David, king of the land, that's the one of whom they sing. And wow, the next point will be, wait, what's he doing here by himself? If he's such a famous general, what's he doing by himself? And so he realizes they know who he is. And the next step will be, oh my goodness, he is, running away from Saul, or something's going on. Whatever it is, it could spell big trouble. And so David is off. Okay, now we're going to go on to chapter 22. David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard, they joined him down there. Everyone who was in straits and everyone who was in debt and everyone who was desperate joined him. Okay, now we're gonna go back to this part of chapter 22 later, okay, because he has gotten to a place where his whole family now gathered in one place in this cave, and he ends up becoming a man with 400 people, okay, and there's these few verses through verse 5. We're going to go back and discuss them next week. What was going on there in Adullam, what happened with David, etc. Okay, now we're going to go to verse 6, and this is taking us back to a continuation of what happened in Nov. Okay, when Saul heard that David and the men with him had been located, Saul was then in Gibeah. Where's Gibeah? Also in Benjamin. Now, remember that Nov, Kiryat Yearim, and Gibeah are all part of Benjamin. Now, Benjamin is a very small area, and it's wider more than it's, deep, higher. Okay, if you think of a map. Okay, so going from Jerusalem, Benjamin starts at Jerusalem and goes north. So from Jerusalem north, it's not that big a distance to the end of the Benjamin territory. It goes the width there for a bit, but it's very small distance there. And all of these places that we've mentioned are all in Benjamin, and they're all fairly close to Jerusalem. Okay, so Saul was sitting in Gibeah, sitting under the tamarisk tree on the height, spear in hand, with all his courtiers and attendants upon him. Saul said to the courtiers standing about him, listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give fields and vineyards to every one of you? And will he make all of you captains of thousands or captains of hundreds? Is that why all of you have conspired against me? For no one informs me when my own son makes a pact with the son of Jesse. No one is concerned for me, and no one informs me when my own son has set my servant in ambush against me, as is now the case. The man has lost it. He is completely and totally paranoid. Okay, he really thinks that David is on this campaign to get everybody on his side to fight or to rebel against Saul. So he has found out that there's a pact between Jonathan and David. Now, we just read, what was the pact? That they will protect each other, they will help each other, not that they will rebel against Saul, not that they're going to harm Saul. Absolutely. It's in the context of, on the one hand, David right now is in danger. On the other hand, Jonathan may one day be in danger because he's Saul's son, if the tables, are turned or whatever. And it's a personal covenant between them, and it has nothing to do with it. Does not endanger Saul in any way. And yet Saul is taking this way beyond. He looks at his own men and he's saying, "Oh, you're gonna be open for bribery. David is gonna promise you all kinds of things, and then you'll join him." And he's nuts. He's just nuts. Okay. So as he's there, complaining, who shows up but Doeg the Edomite, the fellow who, what we learned, was sitting in Nov when David was there. Doeg the Edomite, who was standing among the courtiers of Saul, spoke up. "I saw the son of Joseph come to Achimelech, son of Achitub, at Nob. He inquired of the Lord on his behalf and gave him provisions. He also gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." Thereupon the king sent for the priest Achimelech, son of Achitub, and for all the priests belonging to his father's house at Nob. They all came to the king, and Saul said, "Listen to me, son of Achitub." "Yes, my lord," he replied. And Saul said to him, "Why have you and the son of Jesse conspired against me? You gave him food and a sword and inquired of God for him that he may rise in ambush against me, as is now the case." Again, what happened? Achimelech knew nothing about what David was doing. He did not know that Saul was coming against him. He said he was there on a mission of Saul, and as a result, he gave him food and the sword. Okay? He's fine. He's fine with everybody. But Saul doesn't even give him a chance to explain himself. He immediately accuses him as conspiring with David against Saul. And Achimelech defends himself. Achimelech replied to the king, "But who is there among all your courtiers as trusted as David, son-in-law of your majesty, and obedient to your bidding, and esteemed in your household?" Okay? He's saying, why would I even think that David is conspiring against you? If I'm helping him, in my mind, I'm helping you, Saul. This is the first time that I inquired of God for him. I have done no wrong. Let not your majesty find fault with his servant or with any of my father's house, for your servant knew nothing whatever about all this. But the king said, "You shall die, Achimelech, you and all your father's house." And the king commanded the guard standing by, "Turn about and kill the priests of the Lord, for they are in league with David." They knew he was running away, and they did not inform me. So he is now telling all of his soldiers there, his courtiers, go and kill all of the house of Achimelech, all the priests of Nov. But the king's servants would not raise a hand to strike down the priests of the Lord. Thereupon the king said to Doeg, "You, Doeg, go and strike down the priests." And Doeg the Edomite went and struck down the priests himself. That day he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. 85 priests he kills by himself. This is a really lovely guy. And then he goes further than that. He put Nob, the town of the priests, to the sword. Men and women, children and infants, oxen, asses, and sheep, all to the sword. Okay, now there's a little bit of an irony here. Okay, at Saul's bidding, he kills everybody in Nob. This is the same Saul who couldn't bear to kill all of the Amalekites and couldn't bear to kill their sheep and their oxen, and here he has no problem. Kill them all, okay? But one son of Abimelech, son of Achitub, escaped. His name was Eviatar, and he fled to David. When Eviatar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord, David said to Eviatar, "I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would tell Saul, 'I am to blame for all the deaths in your father's house. Stay with me, do not be afraid, for whoever seeks your life must seek my life also. It will be my care to guard you.'" Okay, so this is a tragic story, and what we're seeing is I don't know, just it's awful. It's Saul's paranoid. There's violence, and these poor priests in Nov are killed at no risk of their own. Now, this story actually has consequences way beyond this particular story here. So first of all, let's talk about Nov. What is Nov? It mentions here that it is a city of priests. However, if we look at in Joshua chapter 21, there is a list of priestly cities. And if I look at the priestly cities, and particularly the ones mentioned in Benjamin, so this is Joshua chapter 21, verses 17 through 19. We have the list. It says as follows. From the tribe of Benjamin, these are the names of the priestly cities: Gibeon with its pastures, Geba with its pastures, Anatot with its pastures, Almon with its pastures, all the towns of the descendants of priests, Aaron, 13 towns with their pastures. Okay, so these are the 4 cities that are mentioned in Benjamin: Gibeon, Geba, Anatot, and Almon. These, by the way, are all they're not too far from one another, and today we have modern communities that are called Gibeon, Geba, Anatot, and Almon, although Anatot and Almon are the same community. It's 2 different names. Anyway, very interesting. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, there is a tradition that is backed up by the verses in this story that actually, after the destruction of Shiloh, the remaining vessels went and moved to Nov, and there was some kind of a temple or tabernacle there, except for the ark, which was in Kiryat Yearim. So it's very possible that, and this is something I've read, it makes a lot of sense, that while Nov was not initially a city of priests, it became a city of priests because after the destruction of Shiloh, they moved there. And so it wasn't a city that was set aside only for priests, but it was a city that had a lot of priests because this is where they moved the tabernacle and where the priests were. Now, we know that it is in the tribe of Benjamin. If you look in Isaiah chapter 10, Isaiah chapter 10, verse 32. Here, Isaiah is talking as it is to Assyria, and he says as follows. Verse 32, this same day at Nov, he shall stand and wave his hand, O Mount of fair Zion, O hill of Jerusalem. Isaiah is calling out to Assyria, and this is during a time as Assyria is calming down, although he's actually saying this probably after the miracle's already taken place. If you recall, this is during Hezekiah. He's the king. Isaiah is the prophet. Assyria is attacking, coming down from the north. They will surround Jerusalem. And at the end, there'll be this miraculous plague, and they will fail, and Jerusalem will be unharmed. So as part of that discussion where Isaiah is referring to that issue, he's kind of in a very picturesque way saying, Assyria, I see Assyrians, they're coming down from the north, about to attack Jerusalem. When they get to Nov, they are waving towards Zion and Jerusalem. Okay, so from this verse, it is clear that Nov is north of Jerusalem. Okay, on his way to Jerusalem, he's hitting Nov, and from there can wave towards Jerusalem. Okay, there are some people, by the way, who think Nov is around or in the area of Mount Scopus of today, which is, of course, north of Jerusalem. Okay, now, so we already discussed who is Achimelech. Okay, now, what happened afterwards with Nov, and how did this all play out in the future? So if you look at, let's start with Joshua. Okay, Joshua chapter 9, verse 23. We are talking about the Gibeonites, and if you recall, when Joshua comes in and we see the word Gibeon, okay, it's the name of a town, it's also the name of an area, and there are people who are called Gibeonites. When Joshua came into the land, it was one of the Canaanite nations, or a subset of one of the Canaanite nations, and they are Gibeonites. And these are people that Joshua is supposed to conquer and drive them from the land. And if you will recall, they they dressed up as if they had come from very far away, and they came to Joshua under false pretenses and entered into a covenant with Joshua where he pledged to protect them, thinking they were not Canaanites, but they came from somewhere else. Afterwards, Joshua finds out, of course, he's very angry. He finds out that they tricked him. They were actually from Gibeon, which is next door. But he had already pledged, and so there was nothing he could do. He had to protect them. However, he does curse them, and he says as follows in verse 22, Joshua summoned them and spoke to them thus: Why did you deceive us and tell us you lived very far from us, when in fact you live among us? Therefore be accursed. Never shall your descendants cease to be slaves, hewers of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God. The Gibeonites will be people who will serve the nation of Israel in the house of God. There will be drawers of water and hewers of wood. And it's an expression also that doesn't mean they're going and chopping down trees and carrying water, but they are serving. They are doing menial jobs in the house of the Lord. Okay? So now let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 21. What has happened here? This is towards the end of David's reign, or at least the story is told at that point. It's not really clear when it happened. Okay, and there is, and if we ever get to this chapter, we'll learn it in depth. But there is a famine in the land, and David prays and asks God, why do we have this famine, and how can we get rid of it? And God says, this is chapter 20, 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 1. David inquired of the Lord, and the Lord replied, it is because of the blood guilt of Saul in his house, for he put the Gibeonites, or some of the Gibeonites, to death. Okay? And as a result, David has to do all kinds of things which are very problematic in penance for it's almost like a blood guilt kind of thing. The Gibeonites now are insisting that David pay them back for the fact that Saul killed so many of them. Where did he kill the Gibeonites? Here in Nov. Okay, the Gibeonites, as we learned in Joshua, were serving in the temple. Okay, in the tabernacle. The tabernacle was here in Nov at this point in history. And when we learn here that in our chapter, that Saul, it's actually Doeg, the Edomite, at the instruction of Saul, comes in and not only kills the priests, but kills all the people who are there in Nov. That would have included the Gibeonites, or at least all the Gibeonites that were there. And so we can see that this incident that we're reading very quickly here is going to have very serious consequences later on. Okay, now we saw that David feels very guilty. Okay, when he hears about it, he tells Abiathar, who is the surviving son of the high priest, that he's going to protect him, and he feels very guilty. He says he should have realized the Doeg was there, and he should have been more careful. He should have talked to Achimelech in private, so the Doeg wouldn't have heard this. He should have been more careful. So he feels very guilty. Okay, now let's see. Okay, so now this incident, okay, is described and discussed by King David himself in Psalm 52. Now, what very often happens in Psalms, there's quite a number of Psalms that David has written as a result of a particular incident, but usually the Psalm itself is written in such a way that on the one hand, it is a response that tells us more about David's response to the issue. But on the other hand, it will also be a psalm that you can be, it's also part of it is also expressed in a more general way, so it has a message in general. Okay, so Psalm 52 for the leader, a maskil of David, when Doeg the Edomite came and informed Saul, telling him David came to Abimelech's house. So we have this said, David wrote this psalm when he heard that Doeg had told Saul had incriminated Abimelech. Okay, and this is the psalm. Why do you boast of your evil, brave fellow? God's faithfulness never ceases. He is addressing himself to Doeg, who is a really bad guy. And he's talking about the fact that he's boasting. In other words, it's not just that you did evil, okay? You boasted at it. You think it was great, okay? And your tongue devises mischief, like a sharpened razor that works treacherously. Okay, so there are a few things here that, I'll read through the whole thing and then I'll point out some things. You prefer evil to good, the lie to speaking truthfully, Sarah. You have all pernicious words, treacherous speech, so God will tear you down for good. will break you and pluck you from your tent and root you out of the land of the living. The righteous, seeing it, will be awestruck. They will jibe at him, saying, here was a fellow who did not make God his refuge, but trusted in his great wealth, relied upon his mischief. But I am like a thriving olive tree in God's house. I trust in the faithfulness of God forever and ever. I praise you forever, for you have acted. I declare that your name is good in the presence of your faithful ones. So first of all, let's see how he talks about Doeg as someone not only who does evil, but boasts of his evil. He thinks what he did was perfectly fine. He doesn't have a problem with it. And he also talks about the fact that trusted in his great wealth, relied upon his mischief. Okay. If we go back to the story that we read now in Samuel, you'll remember those words that I referred to, that it said he was detained before God in chapter 21, verse 8. He was detained before God. Well, there is an explanation of this that I think is just wonderful, that said, what do you mean he was detained before God? He pretended to be a pious man. What do you mean he was detained? In other words, he stayed there longer than normal because he was creating an act. He wanted everyone to think he's such a pious man. And so this is something that David here is referring to when he says, you boast of your evil. And when he says, when he talks about the righteous, they will be jibing him, saying he was a fellow who did not make out his refuge, but trust in his great will, relied upon his mischief. This is the person who boasts, thinks he's wonderful because he pretends to be righteous, but he really isn't. And when he talks about trusted in his great wealth, here, it's the people that connect that with the description of Doeg Edomite, who was the chief herdsman of Saul, saying it's very possible it wasn't just Saul's herds, but his own herd, that he himself was in possession of great property. And of course, sheep at that time would be very, very valuable. Okay, and the other thing, talking about how there's this one other verse that I would point out to. Your tongue devises mischief like a sharpened razor that works treacherously. And here they see this, and this is, again, a commentary that I read, they see this as referring to the fact that it's not only his tongue that was so evil, but actually he used sharp tools. His tongue like a sharp razor, but actually it was his tongue, and then followed by the sword, which he then used to kill all of these people. Now, of course, when I read this, I don't see the sense of guilt and regret in the psalm that we see David expressing to Evyatar. And here I believe it's part of this idea that I said before, when he writes the Psalms, he's not just writing to express himself, he's also writing to give a lesson for everybody. And here he's focusing on something else. He could have despaired at this point. He could have said, the world is against me. Where am I? I'm finished. Okay. And he basically is contrasting himself with Doeg. Doeg thinks he's wonderful, and he doesn't trust in God for anything, even though he spends all that time in the tabernacle. He wants to, he trusts in his wealth, and he trusts in Saul. And he puts his faith with Saul. He says, oh, I'm going to tell Saul about David. I'm going to end up being Saul's favorite, and that's going to do me well. And so he's saying, this is what you relied on. You relied on your mischief. You relied on your great wealth instead of relying on God. David, on the other hand, is in a terrible situation. The king is after him. He has just been betrayed by somebody. He went to gain refuge from Nov to get help. And and right there in the same place that he got help, he is betrayed by this fellow Doeg. And so what is he left with? He is only left with God. And so at the end of the day, he says, look, I'm not going to give up because I trust God. And therefore, he praises God. He says, I praise you forever, for you have acted. I declare that your name is good in the presence of your faithful ones. So far, he has been saved. Okay. And he is, and this is something that he holds on to as something that will take him through all the more difficult times. So that is 21 and 22, and I don't know, very, very interesting chapter, if you ask me. We will go back to this little section here at the beginning of 22 about the cave in Adullam, because it's very important for us to understand that. as we move on to 23 and what happens next with David. Any comments? I'm sorry I went over today, but I just needed to finish that thought. Any comments?
It's interesting that Doeg was an Edomite.
Yes. You see that also some of David's servants or soldiers are mentioned as Hittites, for example, or there's somebody who's from Gat. So there are clearly people of the nations who are living around them and then become loyal and serve the king, whoever that might be. So in the case of Doeg, he's an Edomite, but he is serving Saul. He's very loyal to Saul. He's not very good to David, but he's loyal to the king. And so you're seeing this also later on with David. We know that these nations are around. And, if I think about it today, I think about the Druze who, for the most part, are very loyal to the state of Israel. And unfortunately, this past week, a few Druze soldiers fell in battle in Gaza. These are not Jews, but they are put their lot in with the Jews, and they're loyal and they're serving and they're standing with us shoulder to shoulder. So you see that during this time as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
When the people of Nod were killed and the priests were killed, would you say it is the fulfillment of the prophecy that Samuel had given, that Eli's family will be destroyed?
What do you mean the people of the north?
Of Nod, when the priests were killed in Nod.
Oh, in Nov.
Yes, Nod.
Yes.
Yeah. Remember, there was a prophecy that
right.
Eli's family
it is definitely the same family. It is possible, although there's absolutely nothing in the scripture that indicates that Achimelech is not seen as anything but a good man who was wronged by Saul and wrongly killed. It's possible, though, that it is part of the fulfillment of prophecy. His son Eviatar, who escapes and joins David, okay? That son, later on, he will continue to be a priest for Solomon for a short time before Solomon sends him away. And there we have a specific notation in scripture that Solomon sends him away in fulfillment of the punishment to Eli. Now, the punishment to Eli is not that the descendants will be killed. The punishment to Eli is that descendants will no longer serve as priests in the temple. Right. So that we see with Eviatar, who's Achimelech's son. I don't see any reference to that with regard to Achimelech.
Thank you.
Sondra,
Yes.
who would be serving as high priest during the time that Samuel ruled the country? And he judged the country for quite a few years. Was it 40 years? Something like that. There would still have been a high priesthood there.
Right, because Samuel is not a priest. We did discuss that he was probably a Levite, but he was never a priest. Now, Eli had two jobs. Eli was a high priest, and he also served as a kind of judge, which we learn that at the very end of his life. It says, and Eli ruled the nation for whatever, 40 years or whatever. Okay, but in Samuel's case, he is the spiritual leader. Although now with Saul being king, he's abdicated a lot of that, and he's gone back to just being a prophet. So right now at this time, we have Saul as the king, Samuel is the prophet, and Achimelech is the high priest. Three different jobs, okay? And so Eli's descendants remain high priests until Eviatar, okay, which is after David's death, okay? So this whole period of time that he remains, that line remains the high priest. Samuel is the prophet until he dies. Saul is the king until he dies, and then David begins the new king. But from that time on, there's going to be always three separate jobs: the prophet, the king, and the high priest.
There was a very interesting article in Times of Israel actually today about the Druzim. And about the amazing things that they've been doing and volunteering and serving in the army and everything. It was very interesting.
It's very, and you know what? These Druze, a lot of them, a very high percentage of them, when they join the army, they don't just, become these regular foot soldiers. They do their 2.5 years and then
Yeah,
they go
very
wherever.
high positions.
There are a lot of them that go on to be officers and quite good
Yeah.
officers. So it's very special. It is very special.
Yeah.
And in Israel, people talk about it being a covenant in blood, unfortunately, because so many of them have lost their lives in the defense of the state of Israel.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, great to see you all. And we will meet again next week. Please God. Those of you in the States who are celebrating Thanksgiving tomorrow, have a good one. Enjoy your turkey. And those of you in other countries, you can think about your American friends tomorrow as they're eating their turkey.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you for the teaching today.
Yeah,
Bye,
great.
everybody.
Thank
Shalom,
you.
shalom.
Shavua
Thank
tov.
you. Thank
Bye.
you very much.
Shalom.